Back before the most powerful rune words were added to the game, there was another rune word that was dominating the Diablo II meta. The story behind this long-forgotten item is a haunting piece of D2 history, and one that may still have exploit implications to this day. This is the dark history of Ith. In patch 1.09, Diablo II was mainly a PvP game. There was no D-clone or Uber Tristram at that time, and 99 was sort of meant to be this unachievable level. So most online players eventually hopped in the Blood Moor and dueled each other. Some of the nastiest hacked items existed during this time, and were worth quite a bit. But if you mustered up enough Stones of Jordan, you might be able to trade for one of these. This is technically a rune word called Ith, and it came in a few different forms. But there's no Ith rune in this item. In fact, there are no runes at all. So why is this called Ith, and how is it a rune word? How is any item a rune word? That might sound like a silly question to a seasoned Diablo player, but not when you realize that the real answer is flags. Every item has a flag. Some even have multiple flags. No, not those kind of flags. Programming flags. These types of flags are not visible to players, but they tell the game whether an item is identified, whether it's ethereal, and of course, whether it's a rune word, among other things. Technically, the only thing an item needs to do is raise one little flag to let the game know it's a rune word. From there, the game checks its ID and slaps a label on it. Now, of course, something naturally has to happen in order for the rune word flag to ever get raised in the first place. The correct base item must have the proper runes placed into it in the exact order. When the game sees this, it then adds rune magic to the item, which is all the other abilities in addition to what the runes themselves actually do. And when that's done, the game flips that rune word flag of approval, bringing us full circle to where it checks its ID and slaps a label on it. But what if the game never finds a match when it checks the ID? And that, my friends, is where the magic happens. According to the game engine and most programming logic, flags don't lie. So if the rune word flag is true, the game has to display a name. When trying to ID one of these things, the game relies on what's called an index lookup, which basically uses the runes inside along with the base item itself as data to try to find a match. But when that function fails, it speaks programming language back to the game and says, "This must be the element in the ith position of this index, because I can't find it." So the game, trusting the flag, proudly displays Ith or Ith as the name of the rune word. It's still programmed like that to this day. But making the index lookup fail like this is quite the process. It requires removing the runes from the item, but not with the Herodric cube formula that D2 players are familiar with. Not only did that formula not exist in these days, but even if it did, causing this failure requires nefarious means. A small group of hackers used third-party programs to overload the game, send the right packets, and essentially make it forget that the item had runes in it. And with this exploit, the most godly items of their time were created. In PvP, items finally existed that helped the Barb and Amazon hit attack speed breakpoints efficiently, while also delivering adequate damage. What a golden age it had truly become. I wonder what Blizzard had to say about all of this. The Rust Storm was Blizzard's attempt to stomp out all the hacked items on the realm. It came in the form of an update, and this update shut down the Diablo II servers for several hours. When players were finally able to log back in, many people's characters felt rather naked. Ith items, along with some impossibly good trophies like this, were deleted. While it sounds like this was a one-time sweep of Battle.net, instead it was sweeping changes to the game's programming, forcing it to check the legitimacy of known hacked items. Now, once the game was triggered to check the rune word flag, which happened when you joined or left a game, if it failed during the lookup process, the item would essentially be deleted. And with one swift swipe of their hand, Blizzard had won, and they would never have to worry about these things becoming a problem ever again. Or would they? Soon after the Rust Storm, Blizzard released the most influential patch in D2 history. Prior to this patch, players had to literally break the game to put the power level of other classes on par with the Sorceress. But all of that was about to change. New and powerful rune words were added to the game, and while Ith Items might have defined the previous era, these new additions would define the game's entire future. These were a direct response to the balance issues that Ith Items aimed to solve. Many of them were more powerful and addressed lackluster attack speed breakpoints that made Ith Items feel so good in the first place. This was also the patch where Enigma was introduced. This new rune word was very game-changing. It allowed any class to use the Sorceress's teleport skill, the most powerful mobility skill in the game. With new uniques, new skill synergies, and more, this was no doubt the patch that made Diablo II the game that players know it as to this day. 2 years later, the final rune word additions to the base game were added. And then, it was quiet for a while. In Diablo II, quiet is a subjective term. Of course, there was item duping here and there, new bugged items that popped up, but fast forward 7 years, and Ith Items had been patched for far longer than they ever existed at this point. But around that time, this post appeared in an online forum, and players would soon be reminded of the infamous items of yesteryear. While I tell you about this wild occurrence in D2, I'll also tell you about the wild things happening right now on G2A, the site where you can get all of your digital entertainment at massive discounts. Around the time of patch 1.13c, there was a breakthrough. Once again, with the use of third-party programs, packet sniffing, and some new tricks, hackers could create an Ith item in-game. This was no easy task. They would essentially mind the game into, you guessed it, forgetting that there were runes in the item. From there, they could send certain packets and make it so that vendors would sell you the Ith items. And while that was insane, they weren't nearly as insane as the discounts you can get from vendors on G2A. G2A, or Gate to Adventure, offers everything from software to video games to gift cards and more, all at unmatched prices and with instant delivery. If you enjoy trying out popular titles that pop up throughout the year, this will save you a bunch of money. They even have an app so you can access deals on the go. And now they have something called G2A Plus. For literally 8 cents a day, you can get a free game key every month, 10 items at 10% off their already discounted prices, and more. I've posted a link in the pinned comment that will take you straight to some wild discounts. I also enjoy trying out games on this site, so let me know about the best deals that you find. D2 hackers made it so you could temporarily hold an Ith item which you purchased from an in-game vendor. This was wild because it allowed you to interact with the hacked item. But, as you might already know, there was a big problem. Ith items fail the lookup test when you leave and get deleted because of the Rust Storm coding. Good luck slamming your favorite jewels inside of it. That wasn't going to work. But in this rare instance in time where players could once again create Ith items in-game, was there a way to make them pass the lookup test? How could it be done? And was it even possible? It wouldn't be long before hackers would solve the puzzle and find a way to keep a version of these Ith items around forever. These are hybrid rune words. When an item goes Ith, it keeps its previous rune magic, and because it never stops being a rune word, that never gets rolled again. But it turns out that if you just create another rune word inside of an Ith item, instead of putting random jewels or runes into it, it just changes the name of the rune word. This might sound benign, but the implications of that are huge. This is because the runes themselves have unique effects on the item. The most powerful rune word, Enigma, was one of the most popular hybrid targets. You could turn it into a bone instead, and because of the 2 runes, Enigma would now have 30 to all resistance instead of DR and extra life. Or, if you needed faster hit recovery and resistances, you could make Enigma of Duress. There was even a low-level dueling version called Enigma of Peace, which was quickly banned in good-mannered LLD. But maybe you wanted your Fortitude to have even more resistances and damage reduction, in which case, Fort of Chains was very popular. People used to say that Spirit was broken for its rune cost. Well, how about Spirit of Phoenix? Now, only high runes are in it, giving a huge boost to max resistance. This is extremely broken when made in a Pally shield. Here's mine that I still have on BattleNet. Grief was also a very popular hybrid target. There were so many of these rune words that existed, and to this day, many of them still do. Here's a look at some of the rarest ones I've ever seen. I created these items on D2R, the new age remake of Diablo II. That's because the coding still works like that to this day. Don't tell Blizzard, but I cheated a ladder-only item onto non-ladder, knowing this piece of Ith history that we talked about today. In an early season, new rune words were introduced in D2R, when a glitch was discovered that allowed players to make those new ladder-only rune words on non-ladder prior to the season resetting. Blizzard retaliated. They quickly patched it by removing Plague and the other new rune words from the lookup table on non-ladder. Doing this caused those items to fail the lookup test, display as Ith, and therefore be deleted as a player tried to load into a game.
I also lost a 15% ED near perfect flickering flame helm as well when they fixed that shit.
But having seen this before, I knew what to do. When the ladder reset, they would have to add those rune words back into the lookup table, or else legitimate players would lose their items too. And as we know, the game only checks for Ith when you join or leave a game. So, for the rest of the season, I chose not to log in on any of the characters holding those illegitimate items. And when the ladder reset, I still had those beautiful rune words I'd created. They're not as impressive now, but it turns out knowing a bit of history goes a long way. It's crazy to think that items like this, which lasted for a momentary blink in the game's timeline, could have such a profound effect even to this day. Thank you for joining me on this journey back in time to explore the dark history of Diablo II. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode.